And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to take a look at an example of a price ceiling. One example of price ceiling is what we call rent control. So rent control is just a price ceiling set on the price of renting an apartment. So here we would have the downward sloping demand curve for renting an apartment. Here we have the upward sloping supply curve for renting an apartment. There'd be an equilibrium price, maybe it's $800 a month or something, and here's the equilibrium quantity, where the quantity apartments demanded would equal the quantity supplied. But the government comes along and says, $800, that's too much. Families can't afford it. It's unfair. It's whatever. And so they say, instead of $800, we're going to set a price ceiling at maybe $500 or whatever your number might be. And we're going to say you cannot charge by law more than PC dollars to rent an apartment to somebody. Now, what are the results of that? Well, the first result of that, and by the way, a lot of lawmakers, they might pass these with very good intentions, but there are some unintended consequences, and the first one is that you will tend to see a shortage of housing. That is to say, if you set a price ceiling, the quantity of apartments now demanded, like when apartments cost $800 or whatever our number it was, let's write that. Let's say the equilibrium apartment rent was $800 for, say, a one-bedroom apartment or something, and consumers wanted this many apartments. This was where quantity demanded was. But if you're going to set a price ceiling at something like $500, well, now consumers are going to want to rent a lot more apartments. Somebody who was living in the basement with mom and dad, at $500 a month, they say, oh, well, I'm going to get out of the basement. I'm going to go rent an apartment. And so the quantity demanded goes up, but the quantity supplied is going to go down. Some people who have apartment buildings, they're going to use those apartment buildings for other things. Maybe they'll maybe they'll put in some shops or something. So maybe they'll knock the building down and they'll make it a parking garage, or I don't know, something, if they can't make as much money because they can only charge $500. So the quantity supplied is going to go down, the quantity demanded is going to go up, and you're going to have a shortage in the housing market. Now, what happens as a result of that? Well, a lot of people are trying to get into these limited number of apartments. All these people are trying to get into this many apartments, and they can't. And so we're going to have some way of figuring out how all these people, which one of these people is going to get into these limited number of apartments. Now, normally you'd let the price get bid up, but we can't because there's a price ceiling. So how are we going to allocate? How are we going to figure out who's going to get these limited number of apartments? Well, some of the results of this might be you might get things like reduced quality that we've talked about before. That is to say, maybe at $500 a month, the apartment place says, we're not going to do as good of a job on maintenance, right? So they used to have 5 maintenance guys that came around and fixed things and so forth. And now that was at $800 a month. At $500 a month, now we can only hire 2 maintenance guys. And so they just don't get there as fast, If your toilet breaks, your shower breaks, you got a bug problem or whatever, like that's just going to take a little while to get fixed. And that's just part of the reduced quality. Maybe you get a broken window and it takes them 2 weeks to get there. So you got pieces of cardboard taped over the window or something. They might eliminate parking, or, they used to provide parking and now they're not going to. Maybe they'll even charge you for parking your cars in their parking lot. Maybe they used to be partially furnished. They used to provide a refrigerator and a stove and maybe a couch, and now they don't anymore. Now it'll become a non-furnished apartment because they can only get $500 a month or whatever the price ceiling is. They have to cut some things in order to make a profit. Now, there may also be some non-price rationing, some discrimination. Maybe some places will try to discriminate. Based on race. Of course, that's illegal. So they can't They can't do it legally, but they might, try to do it if it's a bigoted person who owns it or something like this. But more normally, what we see is things like you might discriminate based on families with children and pets. So we'll just make it a children-free, a pet-free apartment building. So it used to be at $800 a month. I'd put up with the kids running through the garden and the pets, going to the bathroom and barking and all that kind of stuff. But at $500 a month, forget it. I mean, I have so many people who want the apartments. I'm just not going to put up with the children and the dogs. I'm just going to say forget it. So you may get some of this non-price rationing discrimination kind of stuff that begins to develop. And then one other thing, and there's plenty of things other than this. I'm just kind of highlighting some of the more important ones. Another one is a black market might develop. So maybe you pay the guy $500 a month, and then you sneak him an extra $300 of cash or something like that each month in order to get the apartment. So you get some black market things start to develop. So rent control is one example of a price ceiling, and these are some of the results, some of the things that we might see happen if you set rent control in a city. So I'm not saying whether you should or should not have price ceilings, whether you should or should not have rent control. We're simply saying, as economists, here are going to be the results. These are some of the things that we will see happen as a result. This has been our podcast, Mr. Hagan. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next podcast.